Hello students, I am Snehal from KLE Society's BC College, Ipani. So in the previous sessions we learned on the different techniques or rather two techniques of the black box testing, and that techniques are nothing but the requirement based testing and the positive and the negative testing. So now in these sessions we are going to move forward for the remaining techniques of the black box testing, and that techniques are nothing but the technique which we are going to discuss in this session is nothing but the boundary value analysis technique. Okay, so in this session we are going to discuss the contents that is nothing but the boundary value analysis and the example which is based on the boundary value analysis. Okay, so boundary value analysis. Now when we want to discuss on the boundary value analysis, now simply the boundary value analysis is going to tell you about the boundary limits which are going to be considered for the valid set of inputs and outputs, also for the invalid set of test cases, we can say that. So a boundary, which means that something limit is there where we need to consider or where we need to test the software program or any application which is going to be considered as per the customer's requirement. So what is the boundary value analysis? That technique which comes under in the black box testing. Okay, so in the boundary value analysis, now the boundary value analysis is a test case design technique. What it is? It is a test case design technique which is used to test a boundary values partitions, both which will be get considered for the valid boundary partitions and the invalid boundary partitions. What it is? It is a test case design techniques. Okay, what it is? It is a test case design techniques. Now basically it is used to test any software application or any program which will be get considered as per the customer's point of view. Basically we need to consider it. So what it is? It is a test case design technique which is used to test any software application for the boundary values in between the partitions, and that partitions are considered both the partition, valid boundary partitions and the invalid boundary partitions. Okay, so when we are considering the boundary value analysis, the boundary value is an input or the output value on the border of the equivalence partition. Okay, what it is? It is going to consider the values. That values should be an input or the output values on the border of the equivalence partitions. Now it includes the minimum and the maximum values at inside and the outside. What it includes? It includes the minimum and the maximum value, and that value should be get present inside and outsides of the boundaries. Now how it is, what it is, which we are going to discuss, or for better understanding we are going to see the example for this. But let it consider that the boundary value analysis is an input or output values. Okay, what it is? It is an input or output values on the border of the equivalence partition. Equivalence partitioning means what? Suppose if we are having limits areas where we are going to consider the equivalence partitions in the inputs and outputs which we are going to be considered for the particular customer's requirement specification checking. So basically a boundary value is an input or output values on the border of an equivalence partition which includes the minimum and the maximum values at the inside and the outside of the boundaries. That is also nothing but the boundary value analysis. So normally the boundary value analysis is a part of a stress or the negative testing. It is a part of the stress or the negative testing. Basically normally we can say that. But what it is, how we are going to consider? As we know that what is the negative testing? We seen the different example on based on the negative testings also. Okay, where we are going to consider that where the error is expected it is not showing the error, and where it is not expected there it is showing the error. That is actually the negative testing which we have discussed yesterday's in the yesterday's sessions also. Okay, or rather in the previous sessions we can consider. So using the boundary value analysis techniques, the tester creates the test cases where a tester is going to create a test cases for the required input field. Now basically this boundary value analysis, it is a part of what? It is a part of the black box testing. Now when we are focusing on the black box testing, basically we should know that a black box testing is nothing but it is purely focusing on what the input is given to the system and what the output is coming from the system, where they are not going to focus on the internal structure, internal part of the code, internal coding of the program, internal structure of any application, but they are only focusing on the input and output, which means that the middle processing of that input given to the system, which is not transparent to everyone, it should be considered in a hidden manner, we can say that. So using the boundary value analysis techniques, here the tester is going to create the test cases for the required input field, for the required input field. Now for example, now consider, for the better understanding of that, consider that for in an example, for example, an application is there. That application is having a simple text box. In that text box we need to enter the address, okay, the address of anybody, we can say that. So the address text box is there. Now which allows us to enter, or which allows for the maximum of 500 characters. What it allows us? It allows us for the maximum of 500 characters. So writing the test cases for the each character once will be very difficult, so that we will choose the boundary value analysis. Yes, definitely. If see there is a maximum, what, a 500 characters. 500 means what? A many more. So if the 500 characters are there in an address and we need to write the test cases for each and every character, which is very difficult and time consuming process for particular organization. So to overcome from that, an organization is always trying to use a middle way to achieve the result of that testing purpose. So for that purpose, an organization is always going to use a boundary value analysis testing techniques, where now what will be happen, see over here, okay, we can say that, okay. So again, what is the boundary value analysis over here? What they are decided? A 500 characters. Now 500 characters means what? We need to do the equivalence partitioning. Equivalence partitioning means what? Whatever maybe the 500 characters are there, it should be considered a one partition, and the valid and the invalid partitions, both are again considered over here. Why? Because it is not possible for an organization to write the test cases for each and every character which we are included in the 500 characters. Why? Because there are the many more characters, we know that. So if there are the 500 characters for the address field and we need to write the test cases for that, it is not possible. So to overcome from that, an organization is trying to use the boundary value analysis. Now how the boundary value analysis is going to overcome from that? Here the boundary value analysis is going to do the equivalence partitioning. Equivalence partitionings of the characters, and according to that they are going to generate the test cases. Now for better understanding of that, we are again going to consider one more example. Now suppose you have a very important tool at the office, okay? What is that? Accept the valid username and the password field. What we are going to use? We are going to accepting the username and the password field to work on that tool. Now it accepts the minimum 8 characters and maximum 12 characters. What we are going to state over here? To accept the name and the password. How many minimum characters are there? 8. And how many maximum characters are there? 12. Okay. So they have given us a limit over here. For the minimum, the 8 characters should be there. And for the maximum, up to which extent we need to move up to that particular character, that is nothing but the 12. Okay. So a valid range. Okay. How we are going to do the partition? So what is the valid range for the name and password field? That is nothing but the 8 to 10. 8 to 10. Why? Because minimum 8 is required, maximum up to 12 is required. More than that it is not allowed, or the system should not be allowed for that. It should, the precaution we need to take when we are developing an application for by such a way, by using the boundary value analysis. Now what is the invalid range over here? Invalid range is 7 or less than 7. Definitely. Invalid range means what? It is not acceptable acceptable by the system. So what is the invalid range over here? A 7 or the less than 7. And what is the invalid range? Again that further, that is nothing but the 13 or more than 13. We need to consider a 13 or more than 13. So here now we are going to divide it in an equivalence partition. See how? What is the valid range? 8 to 12. What is the invalid range over here? 11 or less than 7. Again one more invalid range is what over here? 13 or more than 13. Both are not, or these both should not be get accepted by the system. And this care we need to take when we are developing an application. So write the test cases for the valid partition value and the invalid partition value and the exact boundary values. Now how to write the test cases over here? See, for example, now consider the password length is less than 8. What will be get happen? What? Consider the password length is less than 8. Or second test case. What is the consider the password of the password length exactly 8. Now third case, what? Consider the password of the length between 9 and 11. Okay? Consider the password of the length exactly 12. And consider the password length more than 12. Now see, here all the test cases are covered now. See, what we need to design? We need to design a test cases for the valid partitions also and for the invalid partitions also. So we are going to divide the limits in the 3 equal partitions. So what is the exactly valid partition for entering the password field over here? A valid range is what? 8 to 12 is the valid range. Which means that a minimum 8 characters should be get required over there and maximum up to 12 characters should be get required over there. Okay, more than that it should not be get allowed. Or less than that, less than 8 it should not be get allowed over here. So when we are going to write the test cases for the valid and for the invalid partitions, so first case test case is what? Consider that the password length is less than 8. If it is less than 8, which means that we need to show the error message to the particular user. What the error message a system is going to show for the user? They may going to show you that the minimum 8 characters password is required. Okay? Or rather system is not going to accept it. Next is what? Consider the password of the length exactly. Okay. What they are going to show you a password, a poor length of the password. Yes. Why? Because they have given us a length 8 to 12. But minimum if you are going to take the 8, what they are going to show you? They are going to say that the password length is a poor. Now if consider the password of length between 9 to 10, it's okay. Okay, means what? It is an acceptable thing. Why? Because they have given more than 8 and less than 12. Okay. Now consider the password length exactly 12. Then also it's okay. Why? Because it is a defined. What they have defined? They have defined that the password length should be 12, but not more than that. The maximum limit is what? 12. If it is exceeding, then it should not be get accepted. Now, fifth test case is what? Consider the password of a length more than 12. Now, if user is trying to set the password for particular application or for particular office tool, which is more than 10, 12, then it should not be get accepted by anybody. So this is the example which is based on the boundary value analysis. So here in the diagrammatic way we have shown here what is the first invalid partition if the character or the password character length is less than 8. Next is what? What is the valid partition over here? The valid partition is nothing but the character length is in between the 8 to 12. What is the next invalid partition? If the character lengths are more than 12. So this is the basic example which we are going to consider for understanding the boundary value analysis. So what is the boundary value analysis? A boundary value analysis is a test case design technique. Okay, to test the boundary values between the partitions, both for the valid partition and the invalid boundary partition. So boundary value is an input or output values on the border of the equivalence partitions which include the minimum and the maximum values at the inside and outside of the boundaries. So So that is nothing but the boundary value analysis. So here it is the third sub part or third technique which we are going to considering for understanding the boundary value analysis. So in the next session we are going to move for the next techniques of the black box testing. Okay.